Welcome, my friends, and let's try to delve into the depths of Sudas Shlishis, the 3 meals of Shabbos. Let's try and delve into the depths of Lechem Mishnah, having 2 loaves of bread on Shabbos. And let's try and understand the extent of these requirements, what the deeper meaning of these requirements are, as we're going to see some very, very unique things coming up. I do recommend, if you have the sources, to at least have them with you, that you can have a reference point to what we'll be talking about. And let's begin. There's a lot to get through, and we'll try and unpack it. If there are any questions at any time, please feel free to engage. So we know, just on a very broader overview, that it's brought that there are 3 meals on Shabbos. In fact, there are 4 meals on Shabbos. One needs to eat a Friday night meal, a Shabbos day meal, and a meal in the afternoon after Mincha. And then on Saturday night, there's a requirement to eat another meal. Now, the question is, why? Where's it come from? And not only is that the question, but we see that there's this unique requirement to have 2 chalot, 2 loaves of bread. And we're very particular with the engagement with the bread, how one holds the bread, where one cuts the bread, do you cover the bread? There's all of these unique idiosyncrasies and details associated with the use of bread. Since when did we become so obsessed with how the bread's positioned, what type of bread you have, where it's cut, what is its significance, okay? So that's a very broad overview. Let's start by coming to an awareness of the source. Okay, so the source says like this. It's in Shmois Tes Zayin Chaf Beis. It says, "V'yi b'yom hashishi," on the 6th day, "Laktu lechem mishnah shtei ha'omer le'echad v'yavo kol nisia eida v'yigidu l'Moshe." It says that the Jewish people gathered 2 portions of bread, and they came and they told Moshe Rabbeinu that this is what they did. And the Gemara in Shabbos tells us in Kuf Yud Zayin, Amar Rab Abba b'Shabbos, on Shabbos, Chayiv Adam niftzoi shtei kikaros. A person has to make or break bread on 2 loaves of bread. Why? Tichsiv lechem mishnah, because it says something called lechem mishnah. What's lechem mishnah? 2 loaves of bread, 2 portions. Lechem mishnah. Mishnah is doubled. Lechem is bread. And again, it comes from our initial verse that we quoted in the Torah from Shmot, which says, Laktu lechem mishnah. They took 2 loaves of bread. Now, the Shulchan Aruch tells this, or explains this, or delineates the law much clearer, and tells us exactly what is required here. Listen to the terminology of the Shulchan Aruch. This is the formative halachic approach. It says like this. Dinei b'tziasa pas b'Shabbos, the laws of breaking bread on Shabbos. So he says, boitzeya al shtei kikaros, in brackets, shleimos. So you have to make or break bread on 2 loaves of bread. What's shleimos mean? From the word shalem, full. Have to be full. Yeah, 2 loaves of bread that are full. She'oiches shtem biyado, it says you have to grab both of them in your hand. Now listen to this. It says you have to break on the lower bread. Cut the lower bread. And the Ramah, the Dafka Belel Shabbos, this is only on Friday night, the Ramah explains. But on the day of Shabbos and on the night of Yom Tov, you break the top bread. Thank you for that terminology at home. Very good. It emphasizes it. Call point. Yeah, our favorite words. The reason is according to mystical reasoning, Kabbalah. Okay, just to again clarify what we've just said here, the Shulchan Aruch tells us when we're breaking the 2 loaves of bread, which we haven't yet fully understood why, we said something to do with the manna that fell from heaven and the 2 portions that were associated. And just ask them to mute themselves at home unless if they want to ask a question. So the two loaves of bread that we have on Shabbos is a requirement that we see that comes from the two loaves of bread or the two portions that fell for Shabbos. And then we saw another element, and that is you break the bottom one. When? On Friday night, and you break the top one during the day and on Yom Tov. And the reason is according to Kabbalah, according to mystical teachings. Now, the Mishnah brings this a little bit clearer to our mind and tells us that it's not as avidly followed. You see many people cutting this way and breaking the lower bread and the top bread. So he brings the following, says, and I'll just outline this in an overview here. He essentially tells us that a person should not pass over a mitzvah. So it's a very contentious thing to cut the lower challah. Because if you're encountering something, it's a beautiful concept in general. If you have a mitzvah in front of you, which mitzvah should you observe and which mitzvah should you focus on? The mitzvah that's directly in front of you. Now, which loaf of bread do you encounter first? Top one. So why are you going to the bottom one? And this is the concept in general in Judaism that you never pass over a mitzvah. So if that's the case, why am I going for the bottom one if the top one's at the top? Now, according to Kabbalah, according to mystical teachings, which we're going to try and unpack together, you should do the bottom one on Friday night. But he says to alleviate this issue of passing over the bread, bring it closer to you. So it's the closest one to you. So you have the lower one closer to you and the top one is a little bit further back. Okay, that's what he brings there. Then the Shulchan Aruch says something, or the Bir Halacha brings something. This is very important. Listen to this. The Bir Halacha asks the following question. He says, when did the manna fall? The manna fell on Friday. Yeah? So he says, if the manna fell on Friday, why are we observing so meticulously 2 loaves of bread for every meal on Shabbos? The whole thing is it fell in a doubled state on Friday. If it fell in a doubled state on Friday, so you have 1 loaf on Friday night and 1 loaf on Shabbos day. That's how they used to do it. What's this doubled state of manna now that's fallen on Shabbos? So he comes to a conclusion. I'm going to just abbreviate his terminology here. He says that all of the eating on Shabbos represents the element of Me'ain Olam Haba, which means that there is a consciousness and there is an energy on Shabbos that is a portion or a taste of the world to come. And he says that in the world to come, we're going to eat fish that comes from the Leviathan. So there's a mitzvah to have fish on Shabbos, or ideally a person should have fish on Shabbos. We're going to eat from the behemoth. So you should have meat on Shabbos. And he says, same too, you should have Shnei Alechem. You should have this Lechem Mishnah, double bread, not in reference to the manna of the past, but in reference to the manna of the future, the manna of the world to come. Very, very big shift in mindset as to why we're having 2 loaves of bread. Nothing to do with the past of what happened in the desert. Completely to do with a different state of consciousness, which is represented by Shabbos. What is that consciousness? What are we meant to be sensitive of while we're having these 2 loaves of bread? Okay? Now have a look at this fascinating thing. And this is what really shook everything up. When we learned this halacha, this shook up the whole thing. And I was having a conversation with someone on Shabbos because they had noticed that a number of us at the shul were washing our hands on bread before 12 or before chatzot, which is midday. And they asked me, like, what are you doing? So I said to them, there's a clear teaching in the Shulchan Aruch. Listen to this teaching. So I'm going to summarize this teaching here in the Shulchan Aruch. It's in Orach Chaim Shin Lamed Daled. He tells us that if there, God forbid, is a fire in a person's home, in your home, God forbid, there's a prohibition of going outright and saving everything in that home, lest you come to put out that fire. You can ask someone else to do it, and there's ways of doing it. If there's a fire in a neighboring home, you're allowed to save everything in your home. But there's a sensitivity, and I'm not going to go into that entirely right now, as to what you're allowed to save in your own home. And you know what the conclusion is? The only thing you're allowed to save in your own home if there is a fire, because remember, you're not allowed to extinguish a fire or a flame on Shabbos, is what? You're only allowed to save 3 meals. Friday night, Shabbos morning, and Suda Shlishis. Those are the only things you're allowed to save if, God forbid, there is a fire in your home. If you start going and taking everything else, you'll become so involved, you end up putting out the fire. That's the sensitivity there. All right. Now, that's quite a controversial thing, and I'm sure we can unpack that at a later stage. But the point for tonight is the following teaching from the Mishnah Berurah. Listen to what the Mishnah Berurah says here. It says, Ubeshachris, if it is already past night, you're already in the day, how many meals do you think you're allowed to save? What would you say? 2 meals by deduction, clearly. Listen to what the words of the Mishnah Berurah says. Habach kasav. The Bach writes, Di'imhu la'achar chatzos, listen very carefully, if it is after midday, afilu im adayin lo yachal, even if you've yet had lunch, ein matzil ki mazun suda achas. How many meals are you allowed to say? 1 meal. Why? But the Bach, he writes and he quotes, that if it is already past midday on Shabbos day, you are not allowed to save at all more than 1 meal, even if you haven't eaten lunch yet. Does this make sense to you? I mean, how many of you eat lunch before 12 anyway on Shabbos? We won't go into that at this point in time. Okay, but that would not prove this at all. This is only talking about the fulfillment of lunch. So what we've outlined is this: how many meals on Shabbos? 3 meals. What are the time frames associated with those meals? Friday night, you have the entirety of the Friday night to fulfill the meal. Shabbos day is the red herring. Shabbos day is saying you only have until midday to fulfill anything past 12, you have not fulfilled lunch. Such a crazy concept. Since when am I governed by such a time frame to consume food? Isn't Shabbos all about, and this is essentially what this person came up to me and said. They said to me, one second. The whole thing on Shabbos, have a nice time, enjoy your meals, enjoy your food, enjoy time with the family, honor the Sabbath with some nice challah and some bread. Now you're telling me God cares if I eat my lunch before 12 p.m.? Really? Makes such a big difference?
That's like antithesis.
Oh, so we're gonna see something here, and this is essentially really what tonight's going to be about. Is really unpacking the elements, and so much of the purpose of these series is to reveal that the halachot that we have, the different practices that we have as Jews that have come from the rabbis and that have come from the Torah, have so much underneath that's really governing what is transpiring on a deeper level that we don't often pick up. And so much so that when you actually do study the Kabbalah behind it, you actually understand it much better. You see that there's reasons as to why it's fitting into place. So he writes I've just highlighted here in the Bach, who the Mishnah Berurah is quoted. So we'll just read that highlight. It says, Masha enkein shachris dafka koinem suda, klemezman suda ad soif shashishis. You have until the 6th hour on Shabbos morning to eat lunch. Anything past that time, you're essentially not really fulfilling the best time to eat lunch, or you haven't really, ticked that box off. Now let's have a look. Okay, this was all an overview. This hasn't really answered any questions. It hasn't really revealed any secrets. Comes along the Kaf HaChaim. The Kaf HaChaim tells us something very important. I'm going to read through this quite quickly because it's quite a big piece. But essentially, he says like this. He brings the Arizal, and he says, in the name of the Gemara that we're going to see as well. It says, Bar Kapara, Kol HaMekayim Gimel Sudus, anyone who fulfills the 3 meals on Shabbos, Nitzol Megimel Paronius, will be saved from 3 afflictions. It says, what are the afflictions that they're saved from? Mechevle Shemashiach, the pangs of Mashiach, Umedina Shel Gehenna, the judgment of hell, Umelchamas Gog uMagog, and the war of Gog uMagog. Yeah, do I need to repeat that for you? I mean, where on earth do you see such reward associated with a mitzvah? Just by eating 3 meals on Shabbos, you save from, again, the pangs of Mashiach, the judgment of hell, and the war of Gog uMagog. Just because I ate 3 meals? Very hard to understand that. And he comes along to say, the King Kasabazar Kaddish, Void Bible, that there are 3 particular times, he says, and there are 3 times above. So I'm going to read to you a little bit in the English as what it says. He goes on to say like this. A person must delight in them and rejoice in them. And one who diminishes even one of these meals shows a blemish above, and the punishment for that person is great. And whoever completes the 3 Shabbos meals, a voice goes out and proclaims about him, then you shall delight in Hashem. This refers to the first meal corresponding to the ancient holy one above all holiness. And then it goes to the second one, a reference to the field of holy apples. And then it goes to the third one, which is he represents and says it represents a particular element as well. So it emerges that each of these 3 Shabbos meals, and this is really the fundamental reason why I quoted this, has a root above and a reason in the mystical dimensions. One who neglects any of them bears a great punishment, and one who fulfills them receives abundant reward. So what we're seeing here is that the 3 meals, again, are not just willy-nilly. They're not just random spaces of, you know what, nice to have lunch together for Shabbos, nice to have dinner for Shabbos. They are sourced in something above. And the fulfillment is a rectification of something specific. And the laxity is something that leaves a gaping wound. Let's see how he continues to explain. And he says in Reish Tzadik Aleph, he says like this, and this is quite an important one just to give context. He says, as we've specified earlier, that the Friday night meal can be the entire night. The second one has to be specifically at Shachrit. What's Shachrit? It's the morning, and the morning ends after the 6th hour. It depends, around 12:30 approximately now. It would be midday.
You have a problem.
Right, so what I've been doing, along with 2 individuals here, is that we've been having Kiddush, but we wash on bread at the Kiddush. Yeah, we wash on bread at the Kiddush, we bench, then I'll go home. I mean, if there's someone I know, we'll have lunch with them, and then what's really important is some people say, you know what, 3 meals, cool. So I'll do my 3 meals. Is that me fulfilling 3 meals? I do my Kiddush here with bread. I go home and I have lunch again. Have I fulfilled 3 meals?
With bread or...
with bread, all of the meals with bread. So the Kaf HaChaim brings here that you can't. The 3rd meal has to be specifically after Mincha. After Mincha. Okay, so that's the Kaf HaChaim. So let's try and unpack this, okay? Really, this has been just putting all the pieces out on the board here. We're going to try and piece them together. So comes the Beniyu. The Beniyu tells us, Kama Sudas Chayav Adam, we're on, well, it says they're all source one, but it's on page 5 of, I don't want to say of how many, 15 pages, but we'll see how many we can get through tonight, okay? So the Beniyu says, Kama Sudas Chayav Adam Nechol B'Shabbos. How many meals is a person meant to eat on Shabbos? And his answer is, Shalosh, 3. Venira, the Rabbanan Sabri Shalosh, the reason why you need 3, he says, Keneged Naran. What is Naran? Naran is the neshama, the ruach, or the nefesh. Has anyone got a spare thought there? I'll take that one, then they can share. Yeah. On page 5. So he says Naran is the nefesh, ruach, neshama. So again, listen to this. He says that the first 3 meals on Shabbos correspond to something called the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama. And then the 4th meal, which a person is meant to have, called malava malka, after Shabbos, corresponds to the soul of the soul. So we have 5 souls altogether. The first one is the vitality in the body, which is reference to the nefesh. The second soul is the ruach, which is the emotional soul. And the third soul is the mind, which is the neshama. And he says that the 3 meals on Shabbos correspond to these 3 things. Okay, that's the first reference point that we see that the meals have a purpose in rectifying something on a deeper level. And what did we say? We brought the Gemara. Who remembers what the Gemara said, that if a person has 3 meals on Shabbos, they're saved from 3 things? What were the 3 things? Yeah. Okay, we had the birth pangs of Mashiach. We had the judgment of hell. And what was the last one? The war of Gog and Magog. Yeah. I mean, which one would you pick, just if you could pick any one? Yeah, there to be saved from. Not sure which one's better to be saved. Yeah, Colin, which one would you pick? All of the above. All of the above. Yeah. So at this point in time, it all sounds a little bit random. But the Pri Tzaddik, which is really when this whole realm became open, when I read this, comes to say, in fact, and I'm not going to read it entirely for you, it's a long piece, but he comes to say and ask a simple question. He says, how can the Gemara say anyone who fulfills the 3 meals on Shabbos will be saved from these 3 things? He says it doesn't make sense. If this was taught 2,000 or 3,000 years ago in the Gemara, the birth pangs of Mashiach, only many years ago, many years to follow that, and the war of Gog and Magog, the final world war, is also very, very much far from where a person is. So how can you say individuals of today, we've got how many more years until the year 6,000, according to the Jewish year? A couple of 100 years left. So unless they find some life hack that keeps you living that extended period of time, is this relevant for any of us? The war of Gog and Magog? The pangs of Mashiach? So maybe you can answer and say, it's talking about reincarnations. If a person's fulfilling these 3 meals, it's going to save them in a reincarnated state in the future. But he says something more profound. He says that every single person goes through these 3 things in their life. And he says that this is a reference to a personal rectification through the fulfillment of these 3 meals. And he goes on to describe and say that there are 3 archetypal attributes that destroy a person's life. And it is based on the Mishnah that says, Shloisha devarim moitzien adam min ha'olam. There are 3 things that take a person out of this world. What are the 3 things? Anyone know? If you were to identify 3 things that take a person out of this world, you would say money. What else? Pleasure. Yeah. So the Mishnah says the 3 things are jealousy. When a person is jealous and they're never happy with their lot, they're always looking to see what someone else has, never feeling happy with where they are. Desire, when a person is dependent on pleasure and the consumption of some force of pleasure in order to feel a sense of expansion in themselves. And the last one is something called honor. Honor is when a person is saddened when they feel disrespected, when they don't feel loved by other people, when they're having a fight with others, when they're not feeling honored by others, they feel destroyed. That's the 3 things that take a person out of their life. And it oscillates. A person in their life, juggles these 3 spaces or machinations of the Yetzer Hara. Sometimes they're feeling jealous. Sometimes they're contending with with desire. Sometimes they're dealing with something in their head about, what this person said and what this person didn't say. And it completely subsumes them and takes them out of their world. What the Pri Tzaddik says is the 3 meals of Shabbos come to rectify this. Now, what's strange, and this is why I found it a little bit difficult, is he says it corresponds to the 3 forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And he says the Friday night meal corresponds to the energy. Which one would you start off with? You would think it starts off with Avraham, and then goes to Yitzchak, and then goes to Yaakov. What the Pri Tzaddik, what'd you say? Yeah, nighttime's a time of judgment. What the Pri Tzaddik says is the night meal is a rectification of the energy of jealousy. And it corresponds to the forefather of Yitzchak. The day meal, and he says what a person is meant to be working on the Friday night meal is feeling present, is feeling happy with the one's lot, is not overthinking and looking at what other people have, and not feeling a sense of jealousy. He says the second day meal, or the second meal, which is the meal of Shabbos, represents desire. And he says it's the meal of Avram Avinu, and a person is meant to use that meal for completely taking all of their physical self and their desires of this world and directing it towards spirituality and using the physicality to serve Hashem. So they use the food to honor Shabbos. They engage with all of the physical elements of this world and elevate it. And the final one is the energy of honor. And he says that represents Yaakov. And that's about simplifying. Yaakov is all about truth and all about simplicity. And when a person becomes overwhelmed by their thinking and they start to compare and contrast and think, oh, why this and why that and how this and how that and who said what and why am I fighting there and what's going on there? What am I afraid about? A person taps into Yaakov and they simplify. And he says that's the 3 meals. What's interesting parenthetically is if you have a very nice piece of meat or the nicest meal, which meal should you prioritize according to halacha? Friday night, Shabbos day, or Suda Shlishis? The nicest food. Which one would you say? Jacqueline? Suda Shlishis. No, Suda Shlishis, you go, we had chickpeas this last, if I showed you how many chickpeas were left, you'd be not very shocked. There are quite a lot left. You would think Friday night as well, Mark entering in, the halacha is the nicest meal should be left the Shabbos day, which falls beautifully in line with the law that's brought down by the Pri Tzaddik. Yeah. Some people say, oh, Friday night's my main meal. I come home after the Kiddush, I'm stuffed, I can't eat. That's the big issue by Kiddushes today. They can't have a proper meal. Huge problem. Or you could just wash at the Kiddush, can't you? So what's fascinating is then he ties it to the 3 things that we said that a person is saved from. What's the first thing? Pangs of Mashiach. He says the pangs of Mashiach is a time of war. It's a time of jealousy. It's a time where Torah scholars are undermined. And it all stems from jealousy and not being happy with one's lot. That's the pangs of Mashiach. That's just before Mashiach comes. And then the second time is the judgment of hell, which he says is an energy of fire. And the judgment of fire comes from the fire of pleasure in a person. And the more a person uses that fire of pleasure for things that are problematic, that's their judgment. God forbid. And then the final element, which is the war of Gog and Magog, is a war all about honor. These are individuals that believe in God, but say, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. We're in charge. You're not in charge, God. We believe in you, but we're going to make decisions for ourselves. That's a war of honor. And so much of keeping of the Torah and keeping of the mitzvahs is there to humble a person, is there to allow a person to become softer in that space. Okay, that's according to the Pri Tzaddik. The difficulty, though, with this, firstly, I like order, you know. Now you're messing with the order of the forefathers. It's really hard for me to conceptualize. And secondly, there's a gaping wound here, or a gaping question that we haven't answered, and that is, what's this got to do with bread? And only this, what's it got to do with the way that the bread is ordered? What we have answered, though, is that this manna that's fallen, or the bread that we're dealing with at each meal that represents this manna, represents a higher state of living, a higher state of consciousness that's detached from this world. And at each meal, if I'm working on these things and I'm conscious, I'm working on myself at this on Friday night, I'm working on myself at this Shabbos day, and I'm working on myself at this Shabbos afternoon, I'm entering into a world to come consciousness, which is then represented by that bread. We're going to see a bit more deeper what this is. The Shnei Luchos Bris brings a much more archetypal order. And he says that the order represents the body, the emotions, and the mind. So the Friday night meal is all about working, according to him, is about working on desire, working on your physical self. The Shabbos day meal is working on your emotions. So working on anger, working on jealousy, working on being present. Rabbi Nachman would often speak about how it's prohibited to get angry at Shabbos at all. And just completely being in a state of presence and joy, whatever's happening. And then Suda Shlishis is about working on the mind and not overcomplicating the mind. And that's essentially what the Shnei Luchos Bris brings. He says, fascinatingly, from the verse that says, V'karasa the Shabbos oineg, you should call the Shabbos, what's the word oineg? Pleasure. You should honor the Shabbos or give pleasure to the Shabbos. You know what he says the word oineg stands for? It stands for Nahar hayoytze me'eden lahashkes esagan. The river that descends from Eden to feed the garden. Now, if you take the letters of Eden, it's an ayin. If you take the first letter of Nahar, it's what? A nun. And if you take the first letter of Gan, which is garden, is a Gimel. What do you spell when you have the letter ayin, nun, Gimel? Oneg. So he says, the pleasure of Shabbos is not your cholent. It's not your shluch. The pleasure of Shabbos, the oineg of Shabbos, is completely calibrating the body and its desires, the emotions of anger and jealousy and sadness, and the mind and its overcomplication. And that is the river that descends from Eden. Eden represents the mind. The river, according to Kabbalah, represents the emotions. And the garden is the physical element which represents the body. Right. It follows then, according to the Kaf HaChaim, it said it follows the lower part of the self, which is the nefesh, which is the body, the ruach, which is the emotions, and the neshama, which is the mind. Okay. And the Sulam says this, but listening to this, the Bala Sulam which is a Kabbalistic commentary on, obviously, the Zohar, which would be quite a Kabbalistic commentary. He says, and he brings the Zohar, an explanation as to what is going on with the bread. And he says the following. The Zohar said, Ma'u lechem Mishnah. I'm going at the end of the second line. What is the consideration of these two breads? Hushnei lechem, it's two breads. Lechem min hashamayim, mezer anpin, velechem min haaretz, min nukva. Okay, listen to this Kabbalistic terminology. The first bread comes from the heavens, which represents the emotions. The second bread comes from the land, and it is feminine. It represents what we refer to as Malchus, queenship, which is the lowest sphere of manifestation into this world, which is a feminine energy which we all have. And according to the Zohar, he says, Zeu mikra lechem panag. Lechem panag is a fatty bread. Aval lechem min haaretz, bli chibur im lechem min hashamayim, zeu hu lechem oini. But the lower bread, without its connection to the upper bread, is referred to as the bread of affliction. Shabbos sounds like matzah. Shabbos nichla lechem atachdoin, de nukva belechem ha'elyon, de zer ampin min isbaruch se, hatachdoin b'shvil ha'elyon, hu lechem mishnah. Bang. Listen to what he's just said. The two breads that are functioning here, in context of the spiritual work that we're doing, represents these two parts of self. We said the lower bread, according to what the Sulam has just explained, represents the physical self. The physical self is a vessel. It's looking for something to be a vessel for. When it is not filled with spiritual light, it gets filled with junk. It gets lost. And he says the lower bread, when it is not connected to the higher bread, which is a bread which represents the emotions that are connected to the higher realms of the heavens, becomes a bread of affliction. On Shabbos, we bring the two breads together to represent the wholesomeness of the self, where the body is unified with the emotions, which then takes us to the third meal, which we're not going to go into yet, which is Suda Shlishis. But what we're revealing here, again, is that the bread is not only a recollection to what transpired in the desert. It is something much more systemic that is happening in our lives now. The Likutei Halachos takes this and proper opens this in a very deep way. We might only have enough time to engage with this Likutei Halachos, and we can maybe split up the rest. We'll see. I'm going to read. It's almost I have to read this word for word with you because it is so powerful. Listen to this and try and listening carefully, because he's really going to take us through a perfect meditation and sensitivity that you can have while holding your two loaves of bread together. Listen to what he says on page 7 down the bottom. He says, you know what the whole main point of accepting the Torah is? The whole main point of accepting the Torah is to heal one fundamental thing, and that is one's imagination. The imagination is the most dangerous part of a person's mind, because if a person's imagination jumps to conclusions that are erroneous, they can ruin their own lives. It leads to anxiety, it leads to depression, it leads to fear, it leads to unhealthy desire, it leads to jealousy. So the whole point of the Torah is to clear and clarify the mind. In order to get to a place of emunah, a full state of connection. Now listen to what the main point of emunah is something called the chidush ha'olam. The chidush ha'olam is a consciousness that the world is being recreated every single moment. That in our lives, we're living consciously, that Hashem is manifesting life and existence and the world right now. And through that consciousness, a person can tap into the world to come. This comes through fixing up the two parts of the mind. What are the two parts of the mind? Something called chokhmah and something called bina. What is chokhmah and what is bina? The energy of chokhmah is wisdom. It is a holistic vision that transcends thought. It's the part of you that when you exist in this world and you just feel connected without overthinking, that's a state of chokhmah, where a person just is aware of Hashem's oneness. The second level is something called bina. Bina is the mind that is constantly comparing and contrasting. It's constantly jumping from place to place. Now, there's many things and mechanisms that we have in Judaism to heal that, such as the study of Gemara and Halacha, training the mind how to think. When a person heals these two things, it's impossible to reach this level of clarifying these two parts of the mind unless you've clarified the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is all about mixture. Listen to this. He says that when did man get given the test of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? On Erev Shabbos, on the eve of Shabbos, on the sixth day. When did we get given the 2 loaves of bread that fell down? On Erev Shabbos, the sixth day. So our work in the loaves is to connect these two energy forces, to heal the tree of knowledge of good and evil that was not healed, was state of confusion. You can't enter into Shabbos or into the ultimate Shabbos in the world to come. You can't enter unless you've worked on yourself, and that is represented by the work before Shabbos. Says, how do you know if you've worked on yourself? It's if you're able to go through nisayon, through a test. And what is a test? Test is represented by confusion. If a person can stay through moments of confusion in their life and have emunah and have happiness and have connection and not overthink and not get angry and not get jealous and not look to desire to give them a respite, then they've gone through nisayon and they're able to clarify the confusion. Listen to this. Only once you fixed up your body, your desires, your emotions, can you get to the third level, which is called das. Now, what he's actually saying is there's in fact 2 things that you have to fix up. There's something called the chokhmah and something called the bina. There's your wisdom and your consciousness, and there's something called your mind of comparison. Once you fix those 2 things up, you get to something called das, which is called consciousness, which is represented by sudash dishes. And he says the 2 breads represent these 2 energies. And that's what he goes on to explain is what is the entrance point into sudash dishes. Now, let's go to page 8. What we're going to conclude with is why we cut the bread. Okay, we're going to conclude with this. So you may have noticed, and just as an overview, even if you're not understanding fully what we're saying, what you can take home at this point in time is a recognition that there is a much more going on behind the scenes that meets the eye just by the process of consumption and what these 2 breads represent, the upper realm and the lower realm of self. And how to engage with them is going deeper into who we are as human beings. Now, to conclude here, I'm going to bring you a Gemara. The Gemara shares with us in Sanhedrin. The Gemara is found here in Sanhedrin in Kuf Beis. It's a story told of a rabbi. His name was Rav Ashi. And Rav Ashi would often give a lecture about 3 evil kings that have no portion in the world to come. And one of these evil kings is called King Menashe. Have any of you heard of King Menashe? One of the worst kings in Jewish history. Now, King Menashe, who transformed the Jewish nation into a nation of idolaters, was being spoken about Rav Ashi. And he came to Rav Ashi in a dream. And he says, you know what? It's not fair that you're speaking to me about this. And he asked him a question. He said, where should you cut the bread? Where should you make an incision in the bread when you cut it? I mean, out of all the questions that you can ask someone. And you know what Rav Ashi said back to him? He says, I don't know. I don't know how to answer you. So he comes to him and says, listen, if you speak positively about me in your shiur tomorrow, I will reveal to you the secret. So he says, fine. And he reveals to him the secret. He says to him, the place to cut the bread is where it crusts first. So, on a practical level, where should we cut our bread? The most crusty part of your bread. I mean, it's, I like to cut the bread right on the side. It's much easier to then slice it. But ideally, you're meant to cut it at the most crusty part where it first, is hit by the fire. He says back to him, Rav Ashi, he's like, wow, if you know so many secrets, how could you have been serving idolatry? And he says to him, if you lived in the era that I lived in, you would lift your coattails to run to serve idolatry. That's how powerful the desire was for idolatry before the rabbis removed that desire. They did a whole exorcism of the Yetzer Hara, and they destroyed a section of the Yetzer Hara that was involved with idolatry. And at the same time, it removed what? It removed, there's still miracles, it removed the energy of prophecy. Prophecy was eliminated when they removed the energy of idolatry. But Menashe was struck with this. The question that we need to really deal with here is, what on earth is the significance? Why is it such a big thing to cut the bread where it's first come into its existence? So I'll bring to you what the Likutei Halacha says, which is the teachings of Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi Nosson says that fire is an energy of clarification. You use fire to purify. Now, when fire hit the bread, remember we're dealing with different sections of the self. If we're dealing with the physical self, we're dealing with where the fire hits that and the purification of that energy. When we're dealing with the emotional self, we're dealing with the fire of that space and how to purify that environment. Now, he says that when you tap into the energy behind something and you see it at its source, you're able to essentially rectify it. So the fire's coming through and it's giving energy and it's giving a process to what's there. When you go to its source, you're able to unpack it. So again, when you go to the source of the body, and you say, what is it there for? How am I using my body? Am I using it in a selfish way? What are my emotions being used? What is its source? But what he says is like this. He says that you are breaking something called chametz to matzah. He says when you cut the bread and you make that incision, the consciousness behind the incision is breaking the chet, which spells chametz. Chametz, we know, according to Kabbalah, is the leavened bread. What is something that is leavened? Is something that is unrestricted, something that has become an entity to itself. I came last week to my sourdough, and the leaven was left in it for too long. the whole thing exploded and was like a fountain that was just coming out nonstop. And essentially what we're doing when cutting the bread, he says Kabbalistically, is we're severing it at its source. And we're saying we're not allowing you to just become your own entity. We want to have governance over you. We want to transform you from chametz, which is the chet, which is like a box. We cut it, and what the chet turns into is a hay. What is the difference between the letter chet and a hay? Is essentially a little gap. And he says that's the consciousness in cutting the bread. We're humbling that particular bread that we're dealing with, that particular part of self that we're dealing with, and we're transforming it into chametz, to matzah. What's matzah? Matzah is the bread of simplicity. Matzah is the bread which is not leavened. And essentially, we're coming back to our body and we're simplifying, and we're coming back to our emotions and we're simplifying. Now, to conclude here, we can come back to understanding based on the Arizal, which I'm not going to quote to you, and the Torah, or that the order of the bread is very significant. Because again, coming back to our original discovery, is which bread are we cutting on Friday night? The bottom bread. Now, why are we cutting the bottom bread? Because Kabbalistically, what it's referring to is the body. And the body is the lower energy. It's the first start, it's the nefesh. Then the second meal, which bread are we cutting? The one on top of it. And that is representing the energy of the emotions and the energy that's associated with Yisoid, and it's the energy associated with anger and the energy associated with jealousy. Then finally, when it comes to Suda Shlishis, what's fascinating is if you don't have 2 loaves of bread, it says you don't have to go beyond and you don't have to put too much effort into having 2 loaves of bread. Why is that the case? Well, it makes perfect sense now. Because Suda Shlishis, remember, represents something called a person's Das Elyon. It's a reference to one's mind. And once, and this is what the Kabbalists are bringing here, once you've worked on your body and your desires, and once you've worked on your emotions and rectified that, you now are able to tap into your mind and the consciousness. And that is no longer dealing with these 2 different realms, one on top of the other, etc., etc. It's now just one bread. And that is what Rod is represented by that third meal. Now, to conclude here, what's interesting, we've had to jump over a few sources there, but just to give you a basic overview. What's interesting is I brought you the final source here, and that is a source from the Mei Shiloach. The Mei Shiloach brings a concept called Nahama de Chisufa. Okay, what is Nahama de Chisufa? Nahama de Chisufa means free bread. And it's a Kabbalistic term to explain why God created the world. The reason why God created the world, because God could have just given us the greatest reward just by virtue of creating us. Why did God create us with all of these tests and all of these obligations and with all of these clarifications? And the answer that Zohar brings is something called free bread. If I asked you, what is more pleasurable? To delight from something that you have worked for, or to delight in something that has been a free giveaway? Imagine toiling for something for many years and finally, I've reached this, I've created this, it's my doing. Or something that I've just, found on the side of the road, something that's been given to me for free. What would you say? I see there's a bit of contention potentially, I'm sure, got this for free. That's the best feeling, that the discount I got on this, Gewalt. It's amazing. That's still something that you got. You are the master of the discount. It's like a hunt. You found that you were hunting and you found the discount. But when you think about it deeply, and you realize the effort that you've put into it is now the bread that you've eaten at the sweat of your brow, which is essentially the curse of man. But it's not the curse of man, it's the outcome of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Our job now to eat the bread with the sweat of our brow is to work. And what we're seeing is the bread on Shabbos represents this work. And the reason why there are specific time frames around it is because there are specific energies that are needing to be rectified. Those energies are found in the supernal realm. They are at play. Just like night has a specific energy and day has a specific energy, in the spiritual realms, Friday night has a corresponding energy, and Shabbos morning has a corresponding energy, and Suda Shlishis has a corresponding energy. And the space of cutting the bread and prioritizing which bread, and the element of having 2 loaves of bread, represents this state of fruition. It represents this, what we saw according to the Zohar, represents this lechem paleg and lechem oni. It's the combination of the working self and the clarified self, the ultimate self, the potential and the actual. And the combination of these 2 breads is essentially this representation. Which symbol do we have in Judaism, which is archetypal for this? The Magen David. The archetypal recognition of this concept that we've spoken about, that is represented by the 3 meals of Shabbos and represented by the 2 lechem, the lechem Mishnah, is represented by the Magen David. Why is the Magen David the ultimate symbol for a Jew, even though we have no Magen Davids in this shul? That is for a particular reason. It's used as this archetypal symbol, not sin. But it's like this, now I feel Jewish. I see a Magen David. No. There's much more to being Jewish than just the Magen David. But the idea of the Magen David is essentially that if you look at the lower quadrant, the lower pyramid, the lower triangle, it represents the body. It represents the lower bread, what we refer to as the lechem oni, the part of us that has to work, the part of us that is sometimes feeling lost, the part of us is pulled in all different directions. And then the upper one, the upper quadrant that is weighted to the heavens, represents the soul. It represents this lechem panig, this fatty bread, this delicious bread, this rectified bread. And our job in this world is to draw these things together, that they work in unison, that they function as one. And Shabbos is this archetypal space to delight in the work that we've engaged in the previous week. That day or those days leading up is a reference to Erev Shabbos, the eve of Shabbos, prior to entering into Olam Haba, to the world to come, in our consciousness, where everything has been unified and everything has been rectified. So again, I have no expectation that you come out here with a full understanding of what we've spoken about. I myself don't have a full understanding of what we've spoken about. What I do require from all of us is a recognition that there's so much more at play. And that when we're looking at these meals and we're saying, does God really care if you ate at 12, p.m. before or after? Yeah. The Zohar says it's a massive blemish on a person's soul if they didn't, because essentially what we're saying is that you're lacking that rectification. Now, clearly, if you're just having 2 loaves of bread and you're not working on yourself, you're also missing the point. If you're like, oh my gosh, I just need to eat my bread now and get on with it, you also miss the point. The point is that each meal of Shabbos should be a very, very powerful time to be working on ourselves. The Friday night depends who you paskin like with the Pri Tzaddik, or like we saw according to the other opinions, the Pri Eitz Chaim, different opinions. But whoever you engaging with, recognize that Shabbos is a time to work on desire. It's a time to be cognizant of the body and to see, is my body aligned with spiritual desire and using itself towards the spiritual realm? And Shabbos is a time to be working on my jealousy and my anger and my presence. And Shabbos is the ultimate time to be working on simplicity, to really allowing the mind not to overthink, just to be simple and pure. And that's really the archetypal realm that we're all trying to strive for, not only on Shabbos, but we're trying to get to that state of Shabbos. All of that is in its state of fruition and perfection. Okay, so please God, Hashem should bless us, that we should have the combination of both of these breads. We should have the lechem upon him, the ultimate unification of both breads in our lives. And we should not only have that understanding, but should please God understand that every mitzvah that's in front of us has deep secrets behind it. It's just there for us to investigate, to ask the good questions, and to dig a little bit deeper. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And if there are any questions or comments, please feel free to engage. Okay, yes, Jacqueline. Yeah, you're welcome to join our we have a little challah roll party. We have a challah club. There's the Kiddush club. We have the challah club. And you can join us for the challah club with pleasure, eating some bread before 12 o'clock. Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you for that, Jacqueline. Yes, Andrew. Yes.
Where's the meat? Where's the base meal?
Oh, so that's a great question, and that's a really big issue. You're not having the best food. You should ideally have the best food for that meal.
The brachas are great.
Yeah, the brachas are great. So ideally, we have to up the brachas. Have some nice food there, some enjoyable food. Add some fish, make a geschmack, and it makes a nice meal. You're right. That's still a gaping issue there, isn't it? In terms of the type of food that you're eating at the meal. Yeah, I hear. Yeah, Colin. Yes. Yes, the cutting of the bread before you make the bracha is what we're referring to. Yeah, you mustn't cut it too much. You make an incision. That incision, again, is identifying which energy we're working on, and it's breaking it open. It's destroying the chet that's associating with chametz and turning it into matzah, the simplified element. They might be Christian. I'm joking. No, I've never seen an X. Unless it's on sourdough. They make that, that cut there. But no, you don't need to cut an X. Just a little incision. Yeah, based on what was. Yeah, the one that you're cutting. Now there are a number of opinions as to how many bread or loaves of bread you should eat at each meal. The overwhelming custom that we have is just the one that you've cut is the one that you need to have. So remember, Friday night, the bottom challah, just try and keep it closer. Shabbos day, the top challah, Suda Shlishis, you don't really have to worry. I didn't go into it. There's a teaching from the Kutei Torah. The Chabad custom is to always have the bread side by side. And they say, and this is based on a concept that even though there's the upper world and the lower world, on a deeper spiritual level, you don't even see a distinction. So they hold the two breads together. So, maybe you can do that for Suda Shlishis, however you want to engage with it. But that's, yeah. No. So if you're eating the two challahs before the bracha, again, based on the time frame, you cut that one. And then after you make the blessing on it and you've eaten it, then you can, you can cut whatever you want. But before the bracha, we're talking about where to make the incision. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can use the other challah that's left over. Yeah. Yeah, if it's still whole. Ideally you want it whole. Yeah. One final question. Yes, Andrew. I mean, yeah, cutting or breaking doesn't make a big difference. What is interesting though is throwing. So according to Ashkenazi custom, one shouldn't throw the bread because you have to treat the bread with honor. According to Moroccan customs, they would throw it to represent the manna falling down, So again, the overriding custom for an Ashkenazi is not to show respect to the bread, especially in the consciousness or recognition of what we spoke about tonight, realizing what it represents. You're not going to throw a sefer around. You're not going to throw a book around. We're dealing with, these very powerful spiritual energies that are represented by the bread. you're going to be a little bit more sensitive, yeah? But each to their own based on their halakhic custom, yeah. All right, thank you, everyone. Should be with bracha and kol hakavod.